So as the council knows, Edward Little High School and the Auburn School Department were moved, along with one other school, into the approved projects list for to be eligible for state construction money. There's a process that will be initiated by the school committee and the school department in the near term. And I know the agenda for this Wednesday's meeting will include a presentation and a briefing by school management to the board. I have made a request along with our acting city manager. We had a chance to meet with school leadership, including Chairman Kendall. I made a request that before a building committee is established and appointed, that the two boards, the city council and the school committee, have a chance in joint workshop to talk about the project and some of the moving parts that may go beyond the continuum of process that has to be followed to access the state money, which is legally a school department, school board process. And I wanted a chance to brief the council as mayor. Obviously this has been something that's been on the forefront for a while on some of the moving parts, and this is not exhaustive, but these are some of the big ones that I've been looking at and want to make sure that as a community, as one Auburn community, we seek the best possible solutions to, in particular, the financial analysis as we go forward. So this is actually a Sun Journal photo I stole. Thank you, Scott. But I want to make sure the credit's given. Whether it's a renovated Edward Little High School or a new Edward Little High School, this will be the largest public construction project in the history of our city, and will likely be the largest project for the next couple of generations. So context of that project is fairly important. I'm not going to walk through this slide because there are people much smarter than me that know the intricacies of it, but this is taken from the school committee agenda, and Superintendent Grondin has offered to come in and do a presentation for all of you on the process. My hope is that the council would be interested in a joint meeting with the school committee to discuss ways to collaborate in the process, and that the school committee would also have that interest, and we could walk through those details and where the city may be able to step up in parallel processes, which I'll highlight. But there's some very specific things, and this is not the first time this has been walked through. And it's critically important, and school management understand that each process is followed the way the state needs you to follow each step of this process so you can be eligible for the state money. And there's no doubt that that's a key piece of this, and we have able-bodied folks upstairs to handle that. So I'm going to walk through just a series of slides to plant seeds. Many of you have probably already thought of this, but I want to try to start pushing into a public discussion a lot of these. There's an aerial view taken off our GIS site of the current site of EL, clearly right in the heart of town, 56 acres. Obviously not a full campus, not every amenity you'd expect to see at a high school. The football field's not there, the baseball field, other things. If we were to build a new academic building on site, how we think about other academic or business partnerships that could use the existing building post-renovation. If we build a new building on that site, what would happen to the old building? Are there complementary uses? Might Central Maine Community College or USM see a valuable use? Might small business development centers? Chairman Kendall has often talked about the future of maker spaces and 3D printing shops. Might there be opportunities for some sort of business innovation center there? While those aren't eligible for state funding, if those types of uses would become complementary and help to accelerate the value of the new Edward Little, those discussions and that process to seek funding and seek partnerships really has to begin on a parallel course. What kind of research or education partnerships might be possible with the foreign investment that's coming just down that hill? So the Miracle Enterprise building sits right there at the base of the Elf Woods. There have been conversations with those investors when they've been in town previously about opportunities to have their children study locally. Right now, state law would limit foreign students from being tuitioned into Embry-Riddle. They could be foreign exchange students for up to a year, but that's what makes Hebron or Lee Academy attractive opportunities, because they're structured in such a way where they can tuition in foreign students. And that foreign student tuition obviously helps with the bottom line. Are we going to look at modeling any of that long-term as part of this process? How we would structure the building, it may not change the building and how educational space sits and what the state would fund, but the business model that sits with property taxpayers could be altered. I'm not here to pitch solutions, but I'm here to raise that these are things that alongside the process would value some analysis. And if we do use that current site, which athletic facilities might fit best on that site and which might be best fit somewhere else? I know the gold standard used across the country is putting everything on one campus. In our case, we're not a rural town, we're a city. We have an in-town environment. We have, the 60% of Auburn that's built. That may lend itself to different models. And the state has confirmed that they do, on occasion, with justification, support or would support a two-campus approach. Not everything would have to be on one campus, but you need to have a good justification for that and why you would do that. The process to access local funding. So the state funding process is there. Within that timeline, there are points where there would need to be local votes. In part of that, votes on bonding for local parts of a project. There's a big workbook. Dennis and I were able to get a copy, and all of you will be able to get a copy too, of what the state will fund and what they won't fund. And it gets very specific. How long of a walk of sidewalks, or how long of a run of water and sewer lines? How many seats in an auditorium are considered state funding? And if you want to have additional seats to serve more than, I think it's like a third of your student population at the high school, then it's local. So I can guarantee that there will be a request for some local investment in the project. And I, as mayor, would hope so. I think there's some things here we could do to help grow this community that would be very worthwhile local investments that go beyond the base model the state might offer. But how we engage the community in this project, how we talk about community development challenges and opportunities that relate to the largest public project in our city's history, and how our two boards work together, I think will dictate how grand of a vision can we create? How big can we think about what we might be able to achieve with this 75-year investment? And does that engagement and partnership conversation help to solidify community support for the ultimate solution? And I think it's essential if we're talking about an investment that would require a local vote, that there is significant engagement on the front end of not only both the bodies, but the community at large, the business community, academic partners, citizens of all stripes. If a new site is chosen, other than the current site, there are a number of issues that certainly jump right out. What's the plan to transition the property into a taxable use? Typically, the state doesn't require you to do that proactively. All of you know, having gone through the last budget process, we're running on thin margins. There isn't a lot of wiggle room, and the extent to which we can drive taxable value, get properties on the tax rolls, have productive uses. The school committee may not, with a building committee, need to resolve that, but at some point in the process, if a new site's chosen to walk away from these 56 acres and these buildings, what do we intend to do with that? And can there be some mechanism where we agree, if there's a certain point in time where a new site's chosen, another process is initiated by another group of people to pursue the repurposing of that site? So as soon as that new school opens, we're ready to roll. We can look around the city and realize that we haven't done a great job. We don't have a great track record of positioning properties for pivoting into a taxable or an alternative use. And I think there's an opportunity here for a prime in-town site to have that discussion. Would it be residential, commercial? I'm not pitching the solutions. Would neighbors respond positively? Would we have a NIMBY response like we've seen in other projects, or would there be support? Again, that all gets into the community engagement, neighborhood engagement, but these are substantive issues around how we position ourselves as a community. one property that was floated before, a couple of councilors recall this because there was a pitch for the city to proactively buy the Whiting Farm. The Whiting Farm is currently zoned for ag and resource protection. So it's pretty much zoned for farm use. This is a quote right out of the purpose of the ag zone. So areas zoned ag and resource protection are so remote from existing centers of development that any added uncontrolled growth could result in an economic burden on the city and its inhabitants. So the Mount Auburn Ave to Summer Street is not built sufficient to accommodate a high school there. Water and sewer lines are far removed. Things like natural gas, fiber optic, all those things would have to be run to the site. I'm not saying these things as an attempt to degrade that site in the eyes of the council, the public, or others. But if this decision is made to put our biggest public project in the history of the city in that zone, in the Lake Auburn watershed, there's a host of other conversations that may not be tied to the building project we better be ready and willing to have as a city at the same time. Are we ready and willing to start growing and allowing commercial and residential growth in that area? I would say it would be foolhardy for us to build a high school with all of those amenities and then say no one can be near our high school. No, you cannot build homes so our kids can walk to the high school. No, you can't build businesses that might serve the teachers or staff or others that would travel to that high school. There are other moving parts around how you help to guide building the city and how staff develop a city that aren't in the school board's purview because they're looking at the building and what happens in the building, but it directly relates to how we build a community. And it really requires us being on the same page on the front end of this process. There are a number of other sites. The reality is to find one site that will serve all those purposes, odds are you're going to end up in the ag zone, either north of downtown or to the south of downtown, and you're going to have that conversation. How might you think differently about the zoning around the high school property to leverage that you're creating that asset, but also manage the burden on the city in terms of expanded services and how you fund those, because the state won't fund that. I mentioned the minimum expansion of infrastructure. If it's millions of dollars to extend water, sewer, road to a site, that would be a local only. That's part of the requirement that taxpayers here in Auburn would have to fund, not the state. Space for partnerships, many of you know the work they're doing up at Edward Little with Aspirations, with Early College, with Bridge Year is phenomenal. I think we're actually going to be well ahead of the curve. Having a high school that doesn't have sufficient facilities has led to very innovative approaches by our educators up there and our administrators. So the thought of having to build a space or think about how you use space with those innovations already in place. Current technical education, whether we have more of that on site as a satellite or whether we think about how business locations themselves may be classrooms. Again, the schools will wrestle with a lot of this. Maker spaces, technology, 3D print labs, how we work with other higher ed institutions. USM, as many folks know, has a satellite campus in the industrial park in Lewiston, but doesn't nearly offer all the programs available in Portland-Gorham. Some of that's a space constraint, some of it's a faculty constraint. If we're going to build a new academic campus, I've had some conversations with President Cummings. I think he is open to a conversation about how space might be made available to USM or hybrid space could be available. Some of those may be local only conversations. Some of them there may be other streams of capital for us to look at that the state typically wouldn't fund. But again, all of us being on the same page at the beginning means we can organize ourselves to do that. Same with Central Maine Community College, some of the offers that they've made. I think I've mentioned before when we pitched the workforce development program, 1/4 of the graduating class, the senior class at Telstar, is taking their entire senior year at Central Maine Community College. So they're going to graduate with their high school diploma and 1 year of the community college fully under their belt. Those models have been proven to work elsewhere in the country. Is it something we would want to look at, how you fund that? It certainly does start to alter a bit how you think about space. Is there room for that conversation as we look at building the building without dragging process out? The future of theater and performance space, another example. We have a long-term lease with Community Little Theater for the Great Falls School building. They have pitched trying to launch a capital campaign We've talked about some public-private partnerships to try to redevelop parts of the site. What are our needs as a city for theater performance space? I have heard conversations, and this played out 4 or 5 years ago with a building committee for Everett Little. We're gonna have a theater, we're gonna have a performance space, it's gonna be a big one. And that means that there's gonna be a local investment. What does that mean for Community Little Theater? Are we gonna then have 2 theater spaces, one in town that's not in a taxable property, and one at a high school? And if it's at a high school, is it an in-town location where those who may come to the arts may be proximate to restaurants and other activities downtown, or will it be at a remote site? And how will others involved in performance or theater activities be connected to that effort? And if there is a move to build a new theater space that would accommodate CLT, are we then in a position where we're proactively, as I mentioned with the EL site, trying to get the Great Falls site redeveloped, rather than waiting and then having the decision made and then we're clear? Are we going to try to think a year or 2 ahead to create that local spinoff and try to justify investment in local money? Walton Field, if the state's going to fund a new football field with some minimal facilities, odds are it's not going to stay at Walton. It's either going to be at a new site with all facilities, or perhaps at a new athletic campus if there were to be a split. What would happen to Walton Field? Who would fund its disassembly? Would it stay there and be maintained as part of the elementary school budget? Would it become a city recreation facility, and what would the costs of that be? Would it be some other repurpose? Again, these are land and city assets that how we think about that in the process. You don't have to solve them all on the front end, but being mindful so we're resolving these issues either in the same or in a parallel process is going to help save all of us money and better position us for growth. Another example, connected project. Right now, Everett Little High School plays up at Mount Appetite at the fields managed by Auburn Suburban baseball and softball. That is land that is leased from the city on land we never came to own from the National Guard. There was a study completed a few years ago that said if the city wants to own that land, that there's some mitigation required. Up to and including perhaps giving up to 1/3 of Mount Appetite to the federal government and having it blocked from recreational use. A significant change in that area. Right now we're in a quiet stage. There were some questions that staff had asked of the National Guard that haven't been resolved, with the Guard saying they need to budget to actually fund an appraiser to resolve some of those issues. If we're looking at having some state funding to help build baseball, softball facilities for the high school, do we seek to resolve the Auburn Suburban land lease issue as part of that? If a new complex is built that would have, in addition to competition facilities, perhaps shared practice facilities, do we want to venture into that conversation with Auburn Suburban? Not that folks would want to move again after they had moved from the airport less than a generation ago. But we have a pending issue with the National Guard, where Everett Little currently plays. Is there a way to resolve that? It's a citywide issue where this state funding and perhaps some local money could help to resolve it. As I work to wrap this up here, CM and St. Dom's, Central Maine Community College and St. Dom's, in the past have said that they'd be willing to have conversations about shared use of facilities, be they practice or competition facilities. I am not suggesting that there are sufficient fields in that neck of the woods to accommodate the use of a Class A school like Everett Little, but there is surrounding land that could be available for purchase, which could allow us to think about partnering with a college, with another high school to improve competition facilities, to provide more access to practice facilities. Proximity to the arena might allow us to create a bigger anchor for sports tourism, where if we had an in-town EL academic site, we could have a near Lake Auburn athletic campus, where we could seek to host tournaments to generate additional revenue, not only to pay to maintain facilities, but to generate economic activity, which we definitely need to finish filling out that retail area. And we could leverage some of the state investment to move that forward. These quickly get into conversations that aren't relative to that continuum of what the state says you have to do to access the bond money to build a new high school, but they're directly connected in with how we're trying to grow the city of Auburn and how we connect those pieces. So I didn't come here tonight with answers. I came to frame what I see as a number of issues, significant issues that we need to resolve as a community, that this every little planning process, as we seek to build the new campus, I think it's going to position us to help to resolve. But it's really going to require the council and the school board as partners, and our city manager and superintendent and their staff as partners, seeking to move the community through this process. So I'm certainly happy to answer any questions on this. I know there's more to come with the presentations that will come on Wednesday and through this month and next month, but I wanted to definitely get these things out because time will become sensitive.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for you. What is the very next step in the process as far as you know? I know I'll be in attendance on Wednesday night at the school committee meeting and be eager to hear what they have to say, but in your understanding, what is the very next step in the process? So the two immediate next steps is the appointment of the building committee and the hiring of the architect. So how you structure the building committee and its appointments and process and the scope of work that goes into the architect's work, which includes site location activities, those are the next two steps. Some of the things that I raised are sort of add-ons, additional analysis, additional partners that may help with some of the fiscal calculus that would go into achieving the highest and best result at minimal Auburn taxpayer investment. I'm suggesting that those ought to be part of scoping both those activities, and if pieces of that can't be funded with the state education money, but they get at solving some of our economic development challenges, that we should have that conversation now so we can position ourselves to fund bringing in the experts to solve that. I'm not saying, well, it'd be good if we had that answer, but we have to make the decision today and move on. And the potential of sports tourism is a perfect example.
Mr. Mayor, so I thank you for this presentation. I think you've done a very effective job of laying out some of the potential problems and also opportunities that are inherent in such a project of this undertaking. I can think of a few more, our local agriculture, environmental, and renewable energy are two things that I think we could also have a serious discussion about with this siting. In terms of, as you said, a lot of this falls outside of the direct purview of the rebuilding project itself. Do you have any vision? I know, this is all very preliminary, of how we can continue to move the ball forward with this. Is it a work group? Is it the council itself? This is something that's going to be a multi-year project that will likely outlive the term of this council, and perhaps, the council after it. So, just finding a way to build some continuity in that conversation so that we can continue to move the ball forward.
I think with timing, and certainly the superintendent will highlight this, I think staying on course could put folks in the school in the 2020, 2021 timeline. So the fiscal analysis is going to be the next 12 to 18 months predominantly. My suggestion, as I relate to the superintendent and school committee chair when we had the meeting with our acting manager, was to ask for a joint workshop of the two bodies. I had not yet fully wrapped my mind around what's the specific ask. So what are we asking? The school committee owns this process. What are we asking them to do to deviate or to enhance the existing process to get the state money to help us resolve some of those issues? And I think what I would ask for in a workshop, and my preference would be that they would commit to a workshop before the finalization of a building committee. But I would ask our manager and planning staff, along with the superintendent, and I'm sure the State Department of Education would be helpful, is to map out a timeline and that we would identify some key issues that we want to resolve as part of that and actually build those parallel timelines. So you sort of have your Gantt chart. Here are the steps you're going to walk through to get the state funding. And that sitting under that would be these additional processes. So if the school department wants to control the top process, which is fine, that there would at least be some commitment that as they proceed through at certain steps, we will have committed to stay on target assessing other issues and adding those as inputs to the process. And that on the front end, we're all on the same page that, okay, school department, you're gonna be a lead in this issue. We're gonna go and do some additional analysis with partners, and we're gonna commit to stay on schedule to feed that in, and you're gonna commit that we're gonna resolve, when we have input, we're gonna resolve that issue together before we move to the next step. The last thing I wanna do is slow this down, and I wanna be clear that there's no reason why some of the things that have been brought up and some things that you're raising that may not be state eligible, but maybe partner eligible, let's engage the community and partners to do that. I think that my understanding is that, at least from what was shared Friday, and Dennis, correct me, I think they'd like to have a building committee appointed sometime in November to be able to issue a request for qualifications to architecture firms to have someone on board in January. So, you know, what you look for in qualifications, some of these additional things that may be looked at may attract firms that go beyond just Maine. Which I think could be a good thing for us if we're looking to do something that has not typically been done.
More of a direct question, but something that is basically, you know, hanging over all of our heads is the impact of a merger on this project. Well, you know, you smile, but several of us had hoped that we were going to be able to bring this merger vote forward in November, and the Charter Commission has decided that they weren't ready to do that, and that it will be doing it at some point in 2017. What happens if the city of Auburn ceases to exist after a merger? If, let's say, the citizens of Auburn and Lewiston agree to merge, what happens to this project?
But I don't.
I'm not looking for you to look into your crystal ball, but I just want to kind of get your reaction as to how we should be proceeding.
There will still be a new high school. There will still be a construction project. The assets of one district will become the assets of the shared district. You know, in conversations I've had with leadership over at the Department of Education and others, including conversations 3 years ago, Bill Webster, Jim Handy, Bob McDonald, myself, Tom, and Katie all met when I was pitching, trying to see if we could get the high schools to work together on some specialization of the two schools. Lewiston has an enrollment bubble coming. We already have an issue with LRTC in that our students who want to pursue certain trades can't get access because the seats are taken, which I see as a huge issue, which is why we should be thinking about ensuring that no Auburn student who wants to pursue trades is turned away. Either we have programs in-house or we're willing to tuition them and not make money an issue for our young people. So that either way, there'll be a new high school built. Whether it's a different school committee, that building committee, all that process will still be moving forward. The bond money from the state will still be sitting there.
So, Mayor, one question I had was, it looks like if they plan to have an architect on board by January, it means that the selection process of where the school will go is obviously ongoing, and maybe it's already started?
No,
that'll happen after the architect is chosen?
Yeah, the site location criteria, the building committee, and that's why, you know, being able to raise some of these issues to frame, are we just looking at site locator, find us a study for, find us a location for everything, or are there other community values or considerations that should come forward so the community can weigh? Because the community, there'll have to be a local referendum on the location. The community is going to have to go and raise their hands and say they support a site to then continue that process forward, and that vote would happen next year. So the architect comes on board, they would then work with the building committee on the sort of the alternatives analysis around sites.
Thank you.
And obviously a lot of that work was done a couple of years ago with the building committee. A lot of these issues weren't fully vetted as part of that process, but some of them did come up.
Mr. Mayor, I was invited to attend a workshop in Lewiston, sort of a community gathering and discussion of, you know, where are our kids going to go and how can we help them to get there? And what came up again is the apprenticeship program. I would like to see it part of the recipe somewhere, because I think that's real and I think it's going to be part of our future. So, and we have an expert in the area actually who set up apprenticeship programs nationwide. So excellent opportunity to get ourselves started on something like that.
And I think you'd find the school committee and school leadership, I think they have some of those things on their radar. And this is a great process, even if things aren't related to some of the programming partnerships, I think this process has a chance to get so many other folks to come to the table and offer in-kind support, internships, other things. I appreciate the council giving me the chance to run a bit long with a report, but this is a significant project, and I want to try to plant some seeds around how we might frame working with the school committee proactively on it. Thank you.